I'm Dylan Radigan. I've interviewed nearly every CEO and most world leaders during the past 25 years. And now I'm bootstrapping. I'm turning my attention to the new CEOs and the irrepressible entrepreneurs leading the next generation of innovation in the world. Welcome back to Tasty Live. I am Dylan Radigan. It's time for another episode of Bootstrapping. Today, a special edition because Howard Tolman is here, friend and neighbor of all tasty traders. And Niccolo Conti joins us today. He is a prediction man, at least for the moment and in this moment. And is it a crystal ball? Is he watching for balloons in the sky? Is he with the snake charmers? No, he works for a company called the Visual Capitalist, and the Visual Capitalist does something that I think is sorely needed in this world, which is arrange the data in a way that it actually tells stories as opposed to just represents numbers and shows data in relationship to other data, because life is lived in relationship. And so that sort of work, I think, is valuable and admirable. And so I like the company at the very least, Niccolo. I like the mandate for Visual Capitalist. You work, as I understand it now, as a journalist using that data to provide analysis and make predictions. Is that correct?
Yeah. I'm a content writer over there, and while we personally don't make too many predictions of ourselves, we every year we like to collect a lot of expert forecasts and predictions from all the big bank reports and all the other experts in various industries, and sort of put them together so that people have this single outlook for as much as possible. And so we do that with sort of what we call our predictions consensus, and we put together a report and other things this year.
How reliable is it, either anecdotally or through backtesting, when you assimilate all the smartest people in the world? Because Tom Sosnoff would say there's not a single one of them who knows a goddamn thing, because nobody can know anything, which obviously they know many things. I'm playing Tom's side of the hand here, but I'm assuming that the quality of the forecasting is obviously better 3-6 months out and gets worse as time extends, I would assume.
Yeah, definitely. Like when we looked back at 2022's predictions and sort of how they played out, a lot of specific industry predictions were sort of hit right on the head, like, Meta's decline and things like that. A lot of people were looking at the overheated economy and the need for rate rises. But of course, there's always unknown unknowns and many other factors that you ultimately just can't predict, right? And as time goes on, those predictions get looser and looser.
All right, well, let's cut to the chase. The headline, I would say, is Goldilocks. That whatever is good and whatever is bad, it's all mixed into a pretty good temperature, whether it's price levels or anything you want to try to consider. What are the predictions you're seeing right now that strike you as the most, the ones that have the most conviction, I guess would be the way to phrase it?
Well, I mean, there's ultimately people tend to look at these big risk factors that they're presented, the ones they can at least identify. And the obvious ones we have are inflation starting to cool off and that decline happening. And today we saw sort of an inflation print that's pushing against that a little bit, but sort of this prediction that inflation will decline but remain sticky in some areas. And this could cause sort of a need for rates to remain high, right?
Mm-hmm.
Those are sort of the two big metrics that people are predicting around.
Mm-hmm.
And at the start of the year, we saw a lot of banks and analysts already trying to call for rate cuts coming later this year. Very hopeful, sort of, even if the Fed was already projecting a 5% rate for the end of the year. Mm-hmm. So I think the market is starting to wake up a little bit, especially with today's print on inflation, that things are stickier than expected. Fed officials did come out, I believe, today and yesterday, saying more rate increases might be needed. So we're already seeing that prediction start to shift a little bit as markets are realizing that.
I don't call that a prediction. I would call that's like me predicting the weather based on the fact that it went from sunshine to rain. That's an observation more than it is a prediction. Howard, I find things like inflation forecasting, honestly, profoundly tedious. I just don't think that I like the artificial intelligence, or there's so many other interesting things that for predictions, in my opinion. I feel I don't know. Even if there is a correct inflation prediction, am I going to restructure my assets to deal with this prediction? It's nuts. I'm going to sell my house, and I don't know.
To me, the the thing that is most critical, I think, is how do you measure and what kind of feeling do you have for uncertainty? And I think that it's paralyzing. I think that the next year, forget the market. I think the market is going to be kissing my sister kind of thing. It's going to be flat within very modest ranges because nobody knows anything, as Tom would say. But the truth is, I think that this uncertainty is causing everybody to continue to step back, and I think that that's going to have an impact on new investments, on growth, on companies.
Yeah, I mean, there's no. I mean, let's just call it what it is. Like uncertainty for sure is the greatest barrier to investment, right? And certainly the biggest provocateur of higher price of investment. Cost of capital goes up with uncertainty for sure.
But it also has to do with this idea that I think the companies are going to continue to cut their people. I think they're going to continue to take steps backwards. You're going to have more and more people. In fact, what's interesting, I was going to ask Nicolo, to me, the greatest crime in terms of, numbers and statistics has always been that in the United States, when you stop looking for a job, you're no longer counted among the unemployed. And I wonder, that's something that would be very interesting to have you represent when we talk about visual representation. I mean, there's tens of millions of people now who are just outside of the market.
The stop looking bucket.
Yeah, and we don't count those as unemployed. It's just insane. It's really just insane because they're a drag. They're an enormous drag on the market.
All right. Yeah. That's the macro picture. That's fine. I want to have a little bit of fun if I can here. So I'm going to drop mid tier. We'll go not to the ground, but the middle. And I'm going to make a couple predictions. I'm going to tell you why. I'm going to make one. Google is finished. And Microsoft and Satya Nadella, after played a 10 or a 10-year strategy with ChatGPT that will now serve as the search engine for Bing, which will replace Google. And it'll happen much faster. That Bing, because we used to joke 15 years ago about binging things as like, hey, Howard, why don't you bing us a good restaurant for tonight?
Totally.
Why don't you bing me a taxi? But I'm telling you, this is Satya Nadella's revenge. I feel that's my prediction.
Let me just say that the failure of Bard to even make a bubble.
You couldn't even make the phone work.
But look, here's the thing. I like Satya. I've known him for years. He's a very smart guy. He's a very measured manager. When you compare him to Ballmer and the craziness that used to be Microsoft. But here's the countervailing proposition. And by the way, it's out there. Bing Chat is already out there. I mean,
I know.
It's being integrated, into their own systems in a very powerful way. But 20 years ago, they bought a company called Net Meetings, and they were unable to be Zoom. They were unable, Teams is still limping along 20 years later. LinkedIn, Microsoft is unfortunately, in some respects, the kiss of death. They can't really successfully seem to integrate things. Now, eventually they'll kill.
I agree with the history. This feels different to me. I just feel
I hope so.
Because I perceive Satya as brilliant and patient and deeply methodical, unlike any other Microsoft manager in history.
Yeah. I think that it's wrong to talk about, though, the whole chatbot stuff. I don't know that the most powerful application is going to be with respect to search. I mean, there's just 1,000 other things going on. One of which is, and I write a weekly ink column, and my column from yesterday is about writing. And, is it going to replace writing? Is it going to write the exams for students? And, what are we going to do about that?
I saw that one of the executives from Bic Pens was saying that they think it's going to be good for Bic because professors are going to force kids to write more type papers. So it's a good long Bic pens.
Absolutely going to come back to cursive, handwritten
Write
stuff.
It down, buddy.
Stuff that you can't fake, all of that stuff. But that's really minor. The scary thing is it's a circle, and the circle is the more content that's created, allegedly, the smarter these systems become, these generative systems. Now, the problem is when the creation of that content is not original and unique, but is being generated by the systems themselves, you just wonder whether this is a perpetual merry-go-round and we're just circling the toilet, because it's going to be more and more junk, and Microsoft and Google have already said that they have the ability to detect stuff that's created by AI. That's completely, totally bullshit.
Mhm.
And so, I mean, it's a wonderland and we have no real idea what's going to happen. But I couldn't agree more that this is the first threat to Google in about a zillion years. And the other threat, of course, is that we are waking up to the fact that the attention economy and selling slices of our mind share. Apple put a stake in at the heart of Facebook by taking the capability to do all the cookie and the tracking.
Ecosystem mastery.
Yeah, and I think that we're going to see finally that if your business is dependent on ads, on invasion of privacy, which I say Google and Facebook are in that category, I think long-term they're in trouble. I think Amazon and Microsoft, which are based on a completely different set.
Well, they're based on utility versus invasion.
Exactly.
The future of that. I mean, one of the things that Niccolo, I was having this discussion with a banker last week in Italy, and he was saying there's no point in producing any more content of any kind ever again.
That's
only
exactly
thing
right.
that has any value is to put something that has utility.
Yeah.
Using
my test of a business has been the same for 5 years now, at least for 10 years. Save me time, save me money, okay? Increase my productivity, help me make smarter decisions, or change my status.
Secure my health, improve my health.
Yeah. And if you don't do something for me, I mean, advertising is becoming increasingly just painful. I mean, you look at the Super Bowl, it was a crock of crap. I mean, there wasn't any of these things.
No, that's why utility will be the new mandate for capitalism, because attention alone will no longer be.
And by the way, utility in another sense, utility and as compared to ownership.
Exactly.
As compared to possession. Okay. Nobody wants to own anything today. And we're going to have everything be as a service, and we're going to have everything be basically shared. I mean,
and then you throw tokenization and Web3 record keeping into that. Plus, utility becomes that much easier to accomplish. Is there any interesting things in your data world, Niccolo, regarding AI period or anything related to what the discussion we just had?
I mean, I totally agree that it's more about utility now. And I think we're going to see that in sort of how AI verticals are built out for specific industries. That's where we'll see the most utility coming through. Obviously, having integrated into search and chat and these kinds of things is a very cool and is a step function in sort of our ability to search for things and get quick information delivered in a new method, sort of all collated in a certain way by an AI. But I think that we're going to see sort of efficiency jumps that come from specific verticals and specific industries. And, people are already working on that currently. It's just going to take some time. And I do think that, while Google is on the back foot after their Bard misstep in terms of the James Webb Telescope and those kinds of things, I think they do have this huge user base, which will see sort of the power of AI and get a lot of people excited when they have it.
But they're also 63% ad. To Howard's point, it's an ad business, and I think the ad business is in the weeds on the internet.
Well, I'll tell you three quick things. Number one, I use the term augmented intelligence much more than artificial intelligence. And to your point, Niccolo, we're going to make basic people, so much smarter. For example, customer service reps are going to have such powerful information at their hands now, instead of kicking something up to a supervisor and things like that. So augmented intelligence, remote intelligence, okay? We're competing in a world today where people can be anywhere. I mean, I was talking to somebody about, what do you call a Chicago company when the coders are in Argentina, the design people are in Paris, the CEO lives in Miami? I mean, what makes a company
it's a tax? It becomes a tax jurisdiction.
Yeah. And then look, the last thing about Google that I will tell you is, and this goes to Tesla in an interesting way. Tesla's lead today is miles driven. Okay. It's the experience base, and Google's lead today and going forward for a period of time is going to be the accumulated data that they have, which no one has, an accumulation of data. So if they don't let that get corrupted by this artificially generated new content, that's going to be very powerful. But as you know, one of the search engines basically stopped 3 years ago in terms of the data. So that's sort of probably where the telescope error came from. But I think that it's going to be a data war in many respects, quality of data. And I think that we are going to see that these AI tools are going to make life for a lot of people that we thought were going to have their jobs replaced. I think for a long time they're just going to be smarter and more efficient. I mean, the frightening thing is, think about chess. Okay, chess used to be, that we were basically humans, and then in theory, record keeping through computers, might improve your game. Today, the humans do nothing more than move the pieces. They're like the robots, and the chess systems. Also, talk about jewels. Also in poker, it's the same thing. I mean, you talk to these experts in poker, they go home at night and they look at the trillion hands that the computer played, and that tells them how well they did during the day. I mean, we're the mopes. The humans are the mopes. Eventually the machines are going to be driving the train in more and more respects.
All right, on to the next. The year we're coming up on the 1 year anniversary of the Ukraine conflict. A year ago, if you believe the Russians, they would tell you that if America or NATO intervened, which obviously they have, whether it's that Europe will be brought to its knees in the following winter through an energy stranglehold. Didn't happen. Accommodations in energy, warm winter in Europe, et cetera, et cetera. If you believe the Americans a year ago, they would say, once we flip the switch on the SWIFT, so they can't take money anymore and they can't do this, Russia will be isolated, the ruble will collapse, and it'll implode quickly. But instead, India stepped in, China stepped in. All of a sudden, you have an India, China, Russia triumvirate, even if it's not just oil-based, but still it's a naturally aligned interest of those the two biggest countries in the world by people and the biggest country in the world by by land mass and a substantial natural resource holder being Russia, which is why India and China like Russia, right? Not they want all that land and all that wheat and all that. My point is neither thing happened. Right? That Russia didn't collapse and Europe didn't collapse. And now it's a year later and you're left with a military conflict with no apparent resolution. And I'm not going to try to have us resolve that here because it's unresolvable, I think, certainly from where we're sitting. But I do wonder what both of your points of view are and what the data's point of view is on the move to a multipolar world. That regardless of whatever this outcome and however the thing is, that there is a different power structure emerging that is not a unipolar U.S. world, even though the U.S. is still militarily and economically unipolar unequivocally, but that the motion is away from that. Howard, what's your thought here?
I think that I think that unfortunately, in a way, our politics lags the geopolitical realities of the world. So we're going to pretend to be the world's policeman for too long. But I think that the truth is it's a multipolar world. I mean, it's a given.
Yeah, I mean, especially I would say the biggest benefit of living outside the United States right now in Central Europe is it's very apparent that there are other powerful nations that people interact with, like India.
Well, you left out the whole Arab contingent. I mean, you look at we used to worry that China was buying our bonds and things. I mean, if you look at the penetration of the Saudi, family investment funds in virtually every tech company in America, it's staggering. It's just and
also Dubai was the day that the war broke out, a company opened in the United Arab Emirates to take orders from American companies to buy and sell sanctioned product in Russia.
Right.
The biggest thing that I noticed was that for all the sanction talk, that the actual flow of either oil or goods and services was generally uninterrupted, just more expensive.
Yeah.
Starbucks is operating in Moscow today under the name Starbucks, exactly same everything. Give me your name, blue and like, I mean, if it was in a normal world, there'd be a trademark lawsuit, but in this world, who's going to go to a Moscow court? And my point is that the name changes, but the coffee stays the same, or the oil, or the. And so
no, look, I mean, I think that everybody, made it their business, because it is their business, to avoid and go around the sanctions. And the real issue is we're engaged now in a war of attrition in the Ukraine, and Russia has the long view, and we have the stupid political view here. And we're developing a world reputation as never sticking to our guns, never being somebody you can ultimately rely on in the long term. And I think the next 2 years, this is another one of these uncertainty things. I think that we're going to continue to do a half-assed job of supporting these people. And eventually, I mean, how many more months can they hold out when Russia doesn't care how many hundreds of thousands of
it's existential for Russia. It's in there. It's on their. It's the same as all these idiotic wars, whether it's in Vietnam or anywhere else. When one person is existential and the other person is political.
Yeah, but the funny thing is, it's only in theory politically and reputationally existential. It doesn't mean shit to them in the long term.
Sure,
I mean, that's the joke. I mean, they don't.
Other than the United States, whether it was pressing from Germany into Poland and then Poland into Ukraine, what has been incrementally creeping on the Russians.
Yeah, but as you said, it's the largest landmass. I mean, these are nits at the perimeter. And look, the fact that Putin has made a big thing about saying that NATO wants to take over Russia and all this stuff. I mean, this is crazy. I think an interesting question is going to be looking at what happened with all the buildings that fell down in Turkey, and how quickly they arrested all these guys. I wonder whether there's ever going to be a similar movement in Russia to go after the corruption. And it would have to be sort of initiated by Putin, but he's starting to pick on some of these oligarchs who simply aren't supporting him to the extent that he expects.
I could give him the incentive to. What do you think? Well, what do you got for me?
Well, I mean, the one thing that without a doubt has occurred is that we've seen this multipolarity. We're seeing, the transactions that occurred with ruble from Europe for energy. We've seen a lot of trade is more and more being settled in the Chinese renminbi, and we're seeing, this especially go into the oil market, like you mentioned. It's no more a U.S. dollar denominated market, and you have some core linchpins there, like you mentioned, Saudi Arabia, where they align will be very important. Same with India. India is a major buyer. Saudi Arabia is obviously a major seller. If they align more with that sort of BRICS bloc, then this really starts to present some interesting long-term ramifications.
But the thing is, if you're India, which, by the way, historical ally of the USSR, going way back culturally, going back, 70, 80 years. So and you're jammed in between China and Russia with the world's biggest country. Who are you going to make a deal with?
Yeah, undoubted. But I mean, India has remained fairly, I don't know if neutral is the right word, but they have their own.
I mean, no, listen, Modi
China,
for sure would like to be like Erdogan in Turkey, where he can take Modi wants to be, I'll take a meeting with
everybody's
the Iran meeting. I'll take the China meeting. I'll take the Russia meeting. I'll take the US meeting. And the thing is, but you have to be a uniquely powerful country. And the only one that's been able to do that is Turkey up until this point. Turkey is the only country in the world that can consistently take a meeting with anybody because they're the only Muslim nation in NATO, and there's a billion reasons. But India for sure is playing. Modi is for sure positioning India for that exact posture.
Yeah. I agree. And ultimately, right, everyone is very alert now. No matter what, no one is turning their backs on anything or anyone. And I think that has sort of led to, like with the balloons and these kinds of things over the US, everything now the tension is all slightly higher. And while we're seeing China and the US try and de-escalate things now, apparently there's the potential for a meeting between Blinken and a top Chinese official now. I think that the tensions have just been ratcheted up, obviously, from the war. And while last year all the predictions were quite extreme in terms of how things would play out, now I think it's like Howard mentioned, it's a war of attrition. Everyone is very, very alert and aware and is trying to sort of do business as it's best for them. And countries are realizing that it might not be best with the US, right? It might be best to go direct to Saudi Arabia or to use China. They've been expanding their Belt and Road system incredibly quickly. Argentina has been applying. Brazil and Argentina are potentially working together on their own trade currency. So we're starting to see economic developments that are shifting the ground underneath what was once a very fixed US dollar denominated global economy, right? And so I think that
do you have a measure on the rate of change? Like if you look at basically dollar denominated, let's just use dollar denominated oil transactions as a dipstick test for simplicity. I mean, can you see, is there a notable, is it 60% dollar down from 70% dollar? Is it 50% dollar down from 60? Like what's a metric of change in the percentage of oil transactions conducted in dollars?
I unfortunately I don't have that data on hand, right? But I think if you just think about the amount that the Russia makes up in terms of the oil market, right, and how that is now, flowing through in different currencies,
all non-dollar,
all non-dollar, right? Even with their sort of the Gazprom scheme of exchanging euros to rubles, already we've seen a huge shift, undoubtedly double-digit numbers, right, in terms of the percentage shift, and that's only going to increase as Saudi Arabia does continue its dealings with China and these kinds of things. China and India are some of the biggest oil buyers, if not the biggest oil buyers on the market, right? And if they're shifting away from the dollar, this is going to create a big shift in the market, right?
You also have this. I mean, you talk about a crazy wild card. I mean, you have Trump and Jared with this $2 billion Saudi-backed fund. You have Trump talking about doing, new hotel deals in, Abu Dhabi and Dubai and all these places. And, you have the insanely, possible prospect that this guy could be back, in a responsible position in less than 2 years. I mean, you have to figure that these countries are doing a calculation that says, why are we wasting time with Biden? Why don't we just wait until 2024 and pursue everything that is non-US centric? And then we'll see what happens, because that degree of...
And even the Italians and the French, I'm seeing it. I mean, it's not just, with America's closest allies are still active, are now more than ever actively pursuing additional, they're not alternative suggests that they're rejecting the American relationship, which is in no way true, but it's yes to everything America, of course, if you're Italy or France or Germany or Spain or England, obviously, but also, and what else?
Yes.
In a way that is new and aggressive, whether it's in Tel Aviv or Dubai or Istanbul or down.
And ultimately, it's because countries have realized that being too dependent on one other country is not in their best interests, right?
Which
is the definition of the shift to multipolar. Sorry to interrupt.
Exactly. Yeah. No.
Well,
exactly.
And by the way, that's the message of COVID too, isn't it? That the resiliency and local capability and all of this supply chain risk, every one of those things is a tendency. You look at Amazon; they're ringing every major city in the United States with warehouses. And they're delivering in 3 hours now. But the point is, the message is we can't depend on stuff that's being shipped just in time from China when nothing comes.
Yeah.
So let me give you another prediction. Let's assume to one degree or another we're in a shift to a multipolar world. Fast or slow, I don't care. But that is de facto what's happening. You can fret about what that means for the United States and will it last militarily and whatever, or you can be like, okay, I don't know, because the United States will always be powerful and it will always be relevant, but certainly for the foreseeable future, even in a multipolar world, still be the most powerful country for a long time. But I think it means prosperity in other places that we haven't seen since before ever, maybe. Whether it's in Venice, whether it's in Caracas, whether it's in Tel Aviv, whether it's in Dubai, whether it's in New Delhi, all this, I'm seeing it in Milan, because Brexit, Milan was that's where I've been living, was a sleepy, kind of ugly, dead Italian city 10 years ago. And it's a boom town now.
It's easier than that. We're going to add 3 billion more people to the internet by 2025. 3 billion more people. I mean, and we're going to have, you talk about the power of AI. AI is going to give us simultaneous language translation. That means that all these new billions of people who speak anything other than English, which has been the language of the internet, can now converse. And so you're going to have just a burst of innovation, of communication, of all this kind of stuff. When you add a population that's the size of the current internet again in a very modest number of years. I mean, so connectivity is going to go on. But one other thing that's really critical, I think,
but doesn't that speak to growth, non-US growth as a massive factor?
Totally. It's going to be a whole different world. I mean, you won't have to do one thing with the United States if you can exploit India and China, and you can do it in a common language. But the other thing that's so interesting to me is we're going into a phase where the next 5 years, the next 10 years of new innovation and addressing problems are not software problems anymore, okay? They're agricultural problems, they're climate problems, they're environmental problems. We're going back, it's sort of, phygital, I call it. The physicality is returning to so many of these problems and things. And so, we're living in this cockamamie world where we think, social media is driving the train. I mean, the people who are doing substantive change, addressing food shortages and things like that, very little of that is code. A lot of that is material science. A lot of that is manufacturing. And the horizons and drugs, for example, the horizons are not venture horizons. They're not 3 to 5 year exits. They're 10 and 20-year legacy investments. And we're not equipped to that. The United States doesn't understand that. Our venture community grew up in the Valley, and we think everything is a home run.
7 years is the worst case scenario.
Yeah, it's instant gratification. I mean, and so, are we even mentally and intellectually prepared to compete in this new world? I don't know the answer.
I mean, and I would say for sure we are, only because the greatest barrier, whether it's pick all of the most powerful countries, and I want to add Mexico and Nigeria to the list, which are going to be two of the biggest countries in the world the next 10, 15, 20 years, because they have the pop demographics on their side. And so, but even if you add all those names, the United States, rightly or wrongly, I think more rightly, is unique in the depth of its liquidity and the reliability of its contract law for enterprise. Nothing like it in the world. And I think that's why Tom Sosnoff is very aggressive in sort of defending that asset as the holy grail, because he's like, if you lose your status as a liquidity provider because someone else is relevant, it's good night, Irene, because then you're a 4% country who's no longer the global capital source. You're now you're the northern half of North America, and you're tech and entertainment.
Look, I think this is the Saudis' game plan. I think the Saudis' intention is to provide an alternative to liquidity. I mean, look at this crazy golf thing. Okay, look at Live. Okay, I mean, they're gonna own the opportunity pretty soon. I mean, and by the way, it's more fun, it's more entertaining, it's far more democratized, and the money is unbelievable. I mean, it's just crazy money, and so. They can pick targets.
You think the Saudis, or you think the GCs, the whole UAE, like the whole conglomerate, or you think just the Saudis?
I think the UAE. I think that there's more smarts by far in Abu Dhabi and in the UAE than there is in the Saudi world. So, the Saudi is still the old fashioned, let's wait till the king dies and it'll be MBS or whatever. But I think you go to Abu Dhabi and they do business. You go to Dubai and they do business. Saudi is still very backward in many respects, but they are still building some of these futuristic cities, and it's very interesting. So,
global growth. Anything interesting, Nicolo, regarding the multipolar growth scenarios instead of hand wringing? Opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I think like you mentioned, these Gulf countries providing liquidity, the U.S. has an advantage in terms of the relationships it has already with a lot of emerging nations. When you think of a lot of especially Asian nations around China, the U.S. does have some strong relationships there. If you do see sort of these Gulf countries manage to build relationships in these more emerging manufacturing countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, I think you're going to see a unique shift in terms of who has the power over getting the best pricing on things in terms of manufacturing and industry by taking a foothold in these emerging markets. And I think China's done that in Africa very significantly. Russia has also taken steps to do that. But the US is no slouch. They have great relationships with a variety of countries. And I think that's sort of where we'll see sort of global growth get pushed forward for these countries. The US needs to maintain these relationships with these countries as they sort of near shore away from China, try and reduce these supply chain risks, build its relationship with Mexico, like you mentioned, a country that is getting ready to grow. And with India, as we've mentioned, India has been a big factor in this conversation. I think it's up to sort of these Gulf countries to try and take that sort of mind share away from the US. And I think that's going to be a big driver, right?
I think that we're gonna see growth, but I think that there's two things that are really striking. One is I think a lot of growth is going to become in food and the availability of addressing the crises around food, which will be biologics and things like that. But what I think is frightening is when you take a country like Singapore, not any of the tigers, sort of the next step back from China. The first phase of improving life in those countries is still sweatshop. It's just a slightly better sweatshop. We don't have the stomach for that. I mean, we in America, Apple cannot do that. So I think China gets a pass. I think India gets a pass for like 3 to 5 years until those people reach a standard of living where we can now afford to do business with them. But in the meantime, from going from squat to like salvation, that stuff we don't have the stomach for. And those people are desperate for exactly those jobs. So we can't even compete. We can't afford to do business at that level because of political and social and other bullshit that's going on in this country. And that's why I think there's going to be global growth, but we're not going to take advantage of it.
I think that's what it's sort of striking to me in the prediction is it's like it, and the hand wringing about the U.S. how a U.S. is going to handle the multipolar transition will go on for 10 to 50 years, right? And it'll have good things and bad things. But distraction from the other thing that's happening, which is Mexico, like whether it's Mexico, India, pick them. The barrier in those countries, though, is corruption.
Right. And you see Howard's point about the U.S. not having the stomach for certain things. That the same sort of applies with Europe. The whole focus on the energy transition. These countries aren't looking to rely on clean energy. They're looking for available, reliable fossil fuels, right, upon which to build their economies. Africa has been very clear that they're not interested in the energy transition right now. They're interested in getting their hands on reliable energy, which is in the form of fossil fuels to build up their industry, right, to do that first step, right? And so the US might simply not have the stomach to provide fossil fuels to become a major partner in terms of this kind of growth, that kind of direction.
Very good for Kazakhstan. I mean, everybody shutting down their coal farms coal plants has created a lot of Kazakh billionaires because the price goes up and the coal keeps flowing.
Well, and also a lot of those resources for fossil fuel are local in Africa. They don't have to import anything. I mean, they have to develop mining technology, which is trivial. I mean, it's trivial at this point. They have to get clean water. They have to do a few things, but those are modest things that a lot of countries can supply the solutions to, other than the United States. That's what. And
China has been happily financing a lot of infrastructure development across Africa, right?
Absolutely.
They are already a liquidity provider there. They, with their contracts and those kinds of things.
And South America.
Yes, exactly.
I mean, I was in a COVID prison for a couple of weeks early on in the pandemic in a military hospital in Barbados for obvious reasons, and all of the equipment was Chinese.
Yeah,
in the hospital. They would do your blood. It was all to the.
Yeah.
So I think probably the best move we can make, and it goes to what you said before, Dylan. I think we just take over Mexico. I don't want to say it out loud, but I think we just, starting with the Alamo, we go backwards, we go right down.
Sure. Well, I mean, if you look at the demographics, the reason I still think America is in the best position of any country in the world is only because of the demographics.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
because the Asia, Europe for their fin. I mean, it's just doomed to demographic.
But you know, when you look at the United States, the shift in the next 5 years, 2030, the youth of our population, and especially our voting population, is going to change. It's going to be 5 years younger or more on average. They're all progressive. They're all headed in the wrong direction. You know, it's like, oh my goodness, these are the people that are going to be voting. And, you know, none of that bodes well for, you know, those of us who are remaining capitalists.
We're going to push you off the edge of the mountain.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think my Mexico is the best thing going right now, actually.
Yeah.
I would say if I was going to pick one country on earth, corruption being the obvious and corruption and drugs being the staggeringly obvious and horrible barrier, but the momentum of that demographics and also the move to factories back from China into Mexico, the auto industry in Mexico has gone crazy. I actually think, you know,
there's a pretty good, I'll tell you what, there's a pretty good entrepreneurial community down there too. You know, we've partnered with, you know, Mexico City with the incubators there, Startup Mexico, and they don't stay because of the corruption, but they form these businesses and then they move to the United States. It's really interesting. But in addition, there's a huge workforce that's accessible to US companies at a fraction. It's like, you know, it's like $70,000 to get the best programmer in Mexico. It's $210,000 in the Valley for the same guy.
mm-hmm.
I mean, you know, how much longer can we maintain that, you know, disparity? I mean, it's really tough.
Yeah. And I mean, Mexico's had a super strong start to the year. They like their MSCI World Index, the Mexico Index, sorry, is doing better than China, at least last week when I checked. So Mexico has been benefiting greatly from sort of all of these shifts, the nearshoring, and they're incredibly cheap labor, right? That's ultimately the thing that like you've mentioned, the US can access and maybe take advantage of as sort of that BRICS coalition moves on their side of the world, right?
Yeah.
Positive drift at war with negative entropy. Who will win? Sosnoff says positive drift wins. What do you think?
I think that, Tom, you know, I think that reliance on the structure reminds me of the fact that apparently you still have to walk around your office building and find some lady with blue hair who can stamp something with her notary stamp, even though DocuSign, I've been signing stuff for the last 10 years, right? I mean, the blockchain and these things are going to disrupt a lot of what he says are these formative structural things, you know, deal making, contract writing, all of that stuff. I mean, you know, I think the issue is that you have to start with a 30-year-old as opposed to a 70-year-old, and you have to say what's the central premises of their life. And it's just different. We just don't understand that contract law and all of these traditional things, they're all up for grabs. And the blockchain is just one example of how title and ownership and documentation, those are entire industries. We have a company that's called Soft POS, POS, point of sale. And what are they doing? They're eliminating a $70 billion industry. And in 3 years, it'll be completely gone. What is it? Those stupid swipes for your credit card. Because who in the world is going to do that anymore? You're going to be in a restaurant. You're going to have your phone. The waiter is going to have a phone. You know, Walmart just gave 750,000 Samsung phones to every employee, said, take them home, but put the Walmart app on here. And every one of those persons can now check you out, okay? You don't wait in lines. They can give you information. You know, this whole idea that we give a credit card to somebody who takes it in the back, you know, and pays for our restaurant bill, and it comes back and it's slightly sticky, you know, and all gone, okay? So digital wallet, you know, Starbucks is one of the biggest banks in America because of the deposits on the Starbucks credit cards. So this is just a different world. I mean, you look at the banks, no banks want to have downtown these edifices anymore. They want to have branches, you know, they want to have ATMs, if that. And so I think that he's a generation behind where we're going to end up. I mean, we better have better credentials and better things to hang on to than the fact that, you know, our lawyers make life miserable beyond imagination. And they'll continue to do that. And we regard that as a virtue. It's just not the way of the new digital world.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, you wonder how the first rollout of central bank digital currencies, how that's going to impact things. Also, the first rollout of actual true regulation, how that will impact things. I think there's a lot of uncertainties, and I think people have mentioned this. These other economies like China and Russia, who operate on a more authoritarian basis, they have an advantage there in terms of the ability to roll things out swiftly, in terms of, telling consumers, hey, you need to use this system if you're going to buy groceries, no matter what, right?
Right.
And then I think that obviously opens the door to policing through these systems, enforcing certain things through these systems
They
of
can give
where
you a
you
speeding.
can.
They can give you a speeding ticket just by tracking the
Exactly.
speed of your car.
Yeah,
How
exactly.
about
So
how about
those
how about the
developments will
guy?
be
How about
interesting.
the ruler of North Korea who just said everybody who has the same name as his daughter needs to change their name? I mean,
Yeah,
this gives you some idea of who we're dealing with here.
Well,
right.
listen, when the whole country, when I was watching when they closed the airspace to shoot down that balloon, whatever it was, 5 or 10 days ago, and it's wall to wall cable news. I was in London, BBC, America. It was like all of Europe was watching, and I'm sure the world.
Yeah.
Crazy.
Wasn't a
Crazy.
good look because it made it look like all you need to do is send a balloon to these people
Right. Right.
and they lose their effing minds like a bunch of primitive monkeys
Right.
and close the airspace. Like who needs a complex multi-factor, multi-vector algorithm driven, super campaign when you can just send a balloon?
Or a
Yeah.
virus. You could send a virus.
Yeah. I mean, interestingly, one of the interesting predictions I saw was that China has been testing these balloons, and that could be key if they do make a move on Taiwan, is unleashing just thousands of these balloons that become almost impossible to deal with, right? If you have thousands of these balloons over you that have things that you don't know what they're carrying and these kinds of things, it's a new kind of tactic that is a slower, more creeping aggression that takes up airspace, right?
It's asymmetric warfare. It's
Yeah.
I mean, that's exactly
I'm
it.
over the top of your head, higher than you can reach, and I can drop anything I want upon you. Okay.
Yeah.
I think that's it. I think I mean, listen, this is a very nice conversation, though. I enjoyed this.
Let me just say one last thing, which is that, and this is a little bit Chicago centric, but I think it applies to every major urban area in America. If we don't figure out what to do with crime and what's going on in these major central business districts, we're just screwed as a country. I mean, the retail economy, the fact that these office buildings are not populated anymore, and all the businesses that used to support them are failing. I mean, it's frightening, and I don't know that there's a single city that has anything close to a solution. I mean, New York is trying to go way backwards, and maybe that's working to a small extent, but Chicago is just totally out of control. And I think Chicago is in the middle. I mean, you look at Seattle, Portland, San
San
Francisco,
Francisco is an
they're gone.
apocalyptic.
They're gone. They're gone. Yeah. So I think we have to figure out a solution there. And I don't know that the government organizations are equipped to do that. I don't know. I don't know who can.
The one thing that I'll say on that, and I know that I'm supposed to wrap it up, but there was a man that I used to have on my MSNBC show a lot. His name was David Kennedy. And he was a sort of big, he looked like a cowboy from a Western. He was like 6'5", friendly, but big, sort of long-haired dude. And he wrote a book and actually started a social program called Don't Shoot. And he, for a period of time, and I actually think they should bring him, I think they should make him the Don't Shoot Czar of America, but they would say they would identify someone who's a high probability shooter by age and situation, right, and they would find the 2 or 3 people that were relevant to that person. His right. older brother, his football coach, his grandmother, whatever, and they would have a meeting with grandma, the football coach, and his brother, or whoever the 3 emotionally relevant people were, and say, "You want to smoke pot? You want to skip school? Like, we'd rather you don't do it." But there is zero circumstance, under any circumstance, ever, where you will ever shoot a gun, ever.
Right.
under any
Yeah.
circumstance. And that simple rule of don't shoot, just no shooting.
Yeah.
Well, look, if
that
they-
was
if they
actually
could-
remarkably successful. My point is, it sounds ridiculous. It
No,
had great results.
Yeah, no, I don't think it sounds ridiculous. The problem is that it's slid down to 13-year-olds carrying these, guns now.
I know.
And they have there's nobody who influences them other than their peers. And even the ones who aren't their peers are the ones who threaten them. And so it's crazy. All right, well, listen, thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Howard. Thanks.
Happy
Nico.
New Year.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Thanks for
Awesome.
having me on.
Viva Mexico. Mexico is a shining light. All right. Bye, guys.
Thank you.
That's
Thank
it
you.
for bootstrapping. I am Dylan Radigan. More Tasty Live right after this.